Hi, everyone. Jonathan Alexander here with the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I am very pleased today to have as my guest John Weir. John is the author of two previous novels, The Irreversible Decline of Eddie Sackett and What I Did Wrong. And he is the author most recently of a collection of linked stories, Your Nostalgia is Killing Me. John, thanks so much for chatting.
Thanks for inviting me.
So the title, Your Nostalgia is Killing Me. I have to admit, I was excited just with the title alone for a number of reasons. But first, let me ask you, how did you come to this particular title, which is the title of
It's a
one
bit
of
of
the
a long story. It's actually a few years ago, there was a 3-day Geschrei online, I think through Facebook, among long ago ACT UP activists from the late 80s, early 90s, and current HIV activists living in Canada who were 20 years younger maybe than some of the ACT UP people. And we had a big set to online about a work of art that these two Canadian guys had produced that was called Your Nostalgia is Killing Me. It was a poster based on a famous photograph of a family holding their dying gay son in a hospital room. And the Canadian activists were really angry at the ACT UP people for having co-opted the whole narrative of AIDS. And this online fight went on for 3 days. And then we ended up having a forum about it at the New York Public Library. It was a whole thing. And so the title is a direct reference to that piece of art and also to that fight. So it's a little bit of an in-joke for some of the people who were involved. There were like 25 people yelling at each other. It was quite hilarious.
No, that's wonderful. It's interesting. I'm sure as a writer, certainly in my own experience, it's fun to sort of lace one's work with a lot of in-jokes. But what makes it work is that we are at a moment when I think there is quite a bit of nostalgia for dare I say the 1980s, which those of us who lived through it, and you certainly did,
right.
That is not a time for which I have much nostalgia at all. Having survived the 1980s, having come out on the other end of the first real wave of the AIDS epidemic, it's not a time I would ever want to go back to. And yet younger people have talked about feeling a sort of yearning for the kinds of community building, for the kinds of activism, for the kinds of even agitation that characterized ACT UP and other forms of resistance to AIDS phobia. Your first book, The Irreversible Decline of Eddie Sackett, is one of the first books that really tackles in the time AIDS as an issue. How do you respond to this kind of nostalgia?
I mean, that's part of what I was doing in the new book, Your Nostalgia is Killing Me, is trying to think about what that nostalgia does to you, because I don't know. I mean, I have no real nostalgia for that moment in the 80s and 90s when I was a buddy in the Gay Men's Health Crisis Buddy Program, and then I ran a writer's workshop for a bunch of guys who, over a period of a year, who all died, and it wasn't a festival of delight, I have to say, and it's so puzzling. I mean, maybe you're aware of this, the ways in which that moment of history has been mythologized now. When people talk about it, it's seen as it's been treated as if it were like victorious, wonderful, all of these queers that got together and protected each other, and yay, now we have AIDS drugs. But it didn't feel like that at the time. And I'm not wanting to participate in any romanticizing of that era. And there are people, young people, but also people you're like half my age, I'm thinking. Yes, I'm 63, so
I'm 54, so I'm catching up.
Oh, you're just a lad, really. But anyway, I mean, people my age romanticize it also, people who lived through it. But then there are all these people who lived through it and had no idea it was happening, who need to be corrected in their misapprehensions about what was going on. So I'm kind of a bossy writer in a way. I sort of want my reader to see things from my perspective and to know what I thought was going on.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think your collection, your Nostalgia is Killing Me, really succeeds in that you have a set of stories and a recurring character, the Dave character who does die of AIDS, sort of comes in and out, and it's a wonderful way of handling the challenge of memory, of having gone through a traumatic time. Whatever the character is doing throughout the rest of the book, Dave is a presence. Even long after Dave has passed, Dave is a presence in the character's life. I'm going to resist the urge to ask about the any autobiographical nature of the work, but clearly it's drawing from an intense experience of having gone through the early AIDS crisis, and wanting to deal with the lingering effects of it on those.
Did you experience it as nonfiction, or because I really wanted to ride that line between fiction and nonfiction,
Oh, yeah.
and to give the sense of it's happening in front of you now, even though some of it is about things that happened 30 years ago. I want you to feel the immediacy of that moment, and to believe that it happened to real people in the actual world. But it's also still fiction. So, I mean, I don't know. How did you feel about that? Did it seem like a memoir rather than a collection of short stories?
You know, it's something it's a question I'm very interested in, because I kept going back to the cover page, like, novel or no, linked stories. And I think that's a really interesting, even sort of titillating way to talk about what you're doing with those stories. We're at a moment when I think many writers, and queer writers in particular, I think, are doing this. I don't know if this is an inheritance of the new narrative or what, but we pull so much from our own lives that sometimes I have trouble differentiating what is real, what is not real. And I'm just kind of curious about how you understand that functioning in your own writing, not just as a queer writer, but just as a writer in this particular moment, when it seems like the force of the personal story is more relevant than ever before.
Yeah. I mean, when I started writing fiction in the mid to late 80s, one way in for queer writers was to be autobiographical, or to construct what I think we're now calling a trauma narrative. You know, queer writers weren't necessarily interesting to people, I think, unless they were testifying to their abjection. You know, and so that was kind of my entry was, and also AIDS was just happening in the 80s, and not too many people were really writing about it. And so if you wrote about AIDS, I think you were automatically treated as if you were writing autobiographically, because it was so immediate and there was so little out there about it. And so I think that people in any other category, I have Asian American writer friends, I think my age, who went through a similar process, are immediately expected to be writing about their trauma, you know, their personal experience. And so that's kind of where I started. And then I got more and more involved in a first person voice. The first novel, Eddie Socket, is not, a lot of it is in third person. There are two first person voices, but a lot of it is third person narrative. So it's harder to connect it to me. But then I started writing magazine stuff in first person, and I kind of fell in love with that voice. So I've moved more and more towards nonfiction. And now I feel a little bit like trapped in the trauma narrative category. But I don't know, there it is. There's so many trauma narratives in the world right now, aren't there?
There are. I mean, I think it's a new subjectivity, right? The post subjectivity. I think trauma obviously needs to be handled very carefully. And as somebody who's written my own set of trauma narratives, I want to be taken seriously. And yet at the same time, I think it's now the norm in some ways. With that said, what I think is really interesting about your work is that I feel you in tension with those narratives, because these are not traditional coming out stories by any stretch. I mean, I think of your second novel, What I Did Wrong, which I think is really, I'll go ahead and fanboy a little bit for you. I think it's really one of the undervalued queer books of the of the last 40 years.
Oh
It
my gosh, you're
really
one of
is.
its 5 readers. Thanks for saying that.
No, it's a wonderful book. And I think precisely because it moves beyond the trauma narrative while
Huh.
also taking its narrator's neurotics and his neuroses very seriously. So,
Uh-huh.
and I think as a writer, and this happens throughout Your Nostalgia is Killing Me, I think you're very sensitive to your character's neurotic tics. You call it even narcissism at one point, but you don't pathologize it,
Hmm.
and you allow the characters to think about how their own peculiar, admittedly queer and bent perspective on the world gives them insights. Let me just quote real quick from one of your stories in Your Nostalgia is Killing Me. You character is sort of reflecting that there are realms of commitment and intimacy involving an order of devotion and sacrifice and love that exceed the terms of anyone's sanctified, legalized marriage. And you're talking about the narrator's relationship with Dave, which is not a sexual relationship, but is an incredibly intimate relationship.
I
That's
felt
powerful.
like you wrote that when you read it to me. That
Oh no,
was,
it's beautiful. It's very powerful and
huh.
timely and interesting. And so I'd love to hear your response to that.
uh, gosh, I think that story is long-term survivors, maybe.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't remember, but anyway, certainly when my friend David Feinberg was dying, and he's the, not to get too like, this is all nonfiction, but the Dave in all of my writing is basically, I didn't really have to invent David. I could just sit down and transcribe from memory everything he ever said to me because he was such a character. And so there was no way not to put him in a book because he was already fictional in a way.
Mm,
But anyway, in the moment that he died in 1993, and at that point, long before gay marriage, you had no rights in hospitals, to go see someone unless you were married to them or related to them. And I wasn't married to David. I couldn't have been, nor was I related to him. And I certainly waspy white boy didn't look like I was David Feinberg's brother. So I was very aware in that moment of the kind of commitment that we had to each other, which necessitated my helping him die, or trying to keep him alive and then helping him die sort of at the same time, complicated interactions. And that was a bond that, in a way, the happy smiley face love is love thing around gay marriage somehow for me doesn't quite encompass.
right.
Not to denigrate gay marriage in any way. I mean, there are tons of people who benefited from it, and thank gosh it exists. But I never really felt like marriage was the thing we needed to move towards as a community first and foremost, because there were so many kinds of bonds of kinship and friendship and love and sex and all of that were way stronger in certain ways than the convention of marriage, which feels sometimes like an economic relationship.
Right. Absolutely. So what's next for you? What are you working on now?
Well, speaking of narcissists, I'm writing about my mother, uh, who's dead, so I can say that, and she won't sue me. But she's also in the new book, and she's in Eddie Socket. I fictionalized her in Eddie Socket as Doris Day. My mother she had a huge personality and a certainty. She was the most certain person I've ever met, and also a character like David Feinberg, whom I could not invent. She was already fictional in a way. So I'm going to write about. I haven't quite figured out how to do it, whether it's a novel or whether it's a memoir. Yikes, or some sort of hybrid thing. But I'm spending the summer in Denver, where she grew up, and where I've never really spent any time, and kind of soaking up her vibes and seeing what comes out. So that's my plan.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I have to admit, I was mildly what did the kids say today? Triggered when I was reading the scenes with the mother, because they are so beautifully intimate, and I think there's something profound, precious, perverse about gay boys' relationships to their mothers at times.
They're complicated things.
They're complicated things, but they can often be beautiful things. So I look forward.
She was basically a gay man in lots of ways, although I don't think she knew it.
Yeah.
Alas.
So I have to ask, because we've been talking about the line between fiction, nonfiction, the sort of pressure of the trauma narrative. Did you see Power of the Dog?
I did, yes.
So your reaction, if you don't,
I'm not allowed to say all my feminist friends will hate me. I didn't really like it, but it was partly because I Cumberbatch was so much like every boy who tortured me in high school, yelling and being angry and clearly repressed homosexuality happening there and furious because of it. And I just like, it was like, speaking of trauma, I had PTSD watching that movie because I just don't like dealing with angry white guys.
Yeah.
Because that's my entire childhood, adults and children, all a festival of raging homophobic white guys. So maybe not the right person to ask, but I also was a little like, I haven't read the book. I own it, but I have not read it. Apparently the book is different, but I felt a little impatient with it felt like an overly familiar narrative, like repressed homosexual who's a mean homophobe and then spoiler alert, ends up dying. I don't know. I don't feel like it did that guy justice in a way.
Right.
Nor the kid who befriends him and they weirdly become best pals all of a sudden. I just wanted them to like kiss in the end. I don't know. I want too much from movies, perhaps.
No,
did you find that movie? I mean, did you find it a little like weirdly homophobic in ways it was not aware of?
Oh, completely. Oh. I like you. I found the film sort of worn and weary and it's like, have we not moved beyond the pathologizing the gay guy narrative? This is what everyone is ranting and raving about, that this is such a wonderful film. So all of my friends who sort of this is a film for all of my academic friends who find the aesthetics of it very appealing. I found beautiful. It's beautiful, and I also found it unrelentingly dreary, and even a little homophobic, even. And just continuing to play out this very tired narrative. It didn't do well for me because I saw it almost at the exact same time that I watched Bruce LaBruce's Saint Narcisse.
Which I've never seen.
An extraordinary film, and I thought it's about the exact same problem of internalized homophobia, and yet launches a totally different trajectory. I won't spoil it for anybody. I think it's the film that deserves. If you want a film about queerness, that's the film you watch. Not
excellent suggestion. Not to mention poor Kirsten Dunst, who spent 5 minutes with her mean brother-in-law and turned into an alcoholic and then collapsed. I thought it was bad about her as well. So.
All of it, like, wow, this is a film that hates people. Anyway, enough of that. Can you recommend something that people should be looking at, reading, experiencing? What is pushing your own understanding of sex and sexuality these days?
Well, I went on TikTok for the first time this summer, and specifically Book Talk, because I've been told I should be advertising my book on Book Talk, and I discovered all of these young queer books, queer YA novels, which I had no information about. I'd never read a YA novel. I didn't know about this exploding industry of LGBTQ young adult novels. And so I read 12 or 15 of them, including some graphic novels. And I'm trying to remember the names of any of them. I have a whole stack of them. I kind of read through them all, and they were some of them were fun. Some of them, there's a graphic novel series that's now a TV show called Heartstopper.
Heartstopper, yeah.
It comes from England, and it's a four graphic novel series about two boys in high school. One who's out as gay more or less, and one who is a straight guy, and they end up falling in love, and the straight guy decides he's bisexual, and they go to Paris and they have a happy time, and the parents are generally supportive, and and it was nice to see two 16-year-old gay boys fall in love and be happy, and they have trans friends, and it's multicultural, interracial, but it was also kind of like, what high school did they go to? So different from my experience, and I'm 63 years old, and these are 16-year-olds. I'm written by a woman who I assume is queer. I think she identifies as she, it just made me think about how much has changed in terms of the acceptability of queerness in the world. But then at the same time, all this stuff in Florida was happening, the Don't Say Gay bill that's spreading across the country, and so I'm trying to figure out like what degree of aggressive homophobia and transphobia is still going on in the country, and you know, where my writing fits in relationship to that. Because I held up my book on TikTok and I was like, this is not a happy gay book. These people do not end happily, and you will not feel warm and fuzzy after you read my book. And it seems like younger queer people maybe want warm, fuzzy, love is love, gay is good kind of stuff, which yay them. But is there still room for existential angst in relationship to being othered in America? I don't know.
Oh, I think so, absolutely, and I'm delighted that you are continuing to push on that front. So a good thing for sure. Heartstopper, totally adorable. I agree.
I haven't seen the TV show. Have you?
Yes, totally adorable. Very watchable. I think of it as sort of utopic, right? It's aspirational even now.
It's a good message, right?
It's a good message, and it does some unexpected things at times, which is pleasing. I hope it's the world that our young people are getting.
Indeed.
But until
then, a person needs to have a sense of history at the same time.
Absolutely, yes? Absolutely, yeah. I agree, and I think some of the very best YA does that. I interviewed a few episodes back Kaysen Callender, who wrote Felix Ever After.
Which I haven't read.
Fantastic YA book.
Great.
Also, look for the YA. I'm also the YA editor at LARB, so I love talking about this stuff. Okay. And there's a wonderful book by Gabby Rivera called Juliet Takes a Breath, about a young Latina lesbian. And the best thing about it is that it gives young readers a history of feminism and of women of color feminism. That they really need. It kind of fleshes out those debates, those arguments, the community building. So at its best, that's what the work can do. And I think at your best, it is precisely what your work does as well. Gives us a sense just of the ongoing press of history on our lives, and how we might be tempted to cave into neurosis, but that neurosis can sometimes lead us to our better selves. So thank you.
If only that were true. I'd be a very better person.
This is what we all hope for. I have been talking to John Weir, who is the author most recently of Your Nostalgia is Killing Me. John, thanks so much.
Thank you.